All right, well, I have the pleasure of introducing our two speakers tonight, both from the Adult Protective Persons Division of our office. The first one is Andrea Kalitza. She is the Director of Adult Protective Services for the Marion County Prosecutor's Office. She's been associated with Adult Protective Services since 1997, when she began as an intern after receiving her degree in gerontology. As the director of APS, she manages and supervises a staff of 6 investigators and 1 outreach coordinator who cover Boone, Hamilton, Hendricks, and Marion counties. Next, we have Cindy Ocean. Cindy began her career at the Marion County Prosecutor's Office in May of 2002 as an intern in the Domestic Violence Unit. Cindy was then hired as a deputy prosecutor and remained in the Domestic Violence Unit until October of 2004, when she became a sex crimes and child abuse prosecutor, handling cases ranging from child molest, rape, child physical abuse, and death. Cindy became the supervisor of the Sex Crimes Unit in May of 2007 and remained in that position until taking over the Adult Protective Persons Prosecutor's job in June of 2013.
There will be a quiz later. Good evening. Thank you for being here tonight. Cindy and I are pretty informal in that if you guys have questions throughout our presentation, please don't hesitate to ask. Raise your hand and interrupt us. We want to make sure that you guys are informed and have no questions once you leave here. So I'm going to start out, maybe if my clicker works. Okay, thank you. Okay, giving you a little history on Adult Protective Services. In 1985, the federal government mandated that each state have a vehicle to address adult abuse, neglect, self-neglect, and exploitation of endangered adults. Indiana is unique in that it is the only state within the United States that is housed out of the prosecutor's office. That is very beneficial to us because we investigate our own criminal cases. We screen them through our prosecutor, so it's very nice to be housed within that unit, or under the prosecutor's office. That being said, Adult Protective Services comes under the Division of Aging and In-Home Services. Let me know if you can't hear me if I walk away from the microphone. So we have FSSA, the Division of Aging, houses Adult Protective Services and the Long-Term Care Ombudsman Program. Those are your advocates for the people that are in nursing home facilities or assisted living programs. They're the advocates for those individuals. And then under FSSA, you have the Division of the Bureau of Developmental Disability Services. That's also known as BEADS. They are there to house the individuals that are mentally challenged, developmentally disabled, that population. And then you have mental health and addiction. So these are all of your service programs under FSSA that are going to be dealing with endangered adults. Sometimes that is frustrating in that if we don't necessarily agree on standard operations and procedures, say we have a victim that comes into Adult Protective Services and they're needing placement, and BEADS is that entity that is to do the placement, and they don't do the placement, again, that can be frustrating, and that ultimately we're all under that same umbrella. So sometimes it's a good thing, sometimes not so much. The Department of Corrections is the first largest state-run agency in Indiana, and then FSSA is the second largest, so we're dealing with a pretty big entity here. Funding, or there I should say lack of, the funding comes through at a state level, and that is going to be for your Division of Aging as well and through the prosecutor's office. It's a 2-year grant cycle that is going to be on a fiscal year. And to kind of put things into perspective, Adult Protective Services, it's our responsibility to investigate allegations starting at 18 and over. Our elderly population is growing rapidly. Our baby boomer is the biggest population right now. Adult Protective Services brings in $2.9 million per year. Child Protective Services investigates birth to age 18, okay? They have 1,500 investigators and a $600 million budget annually. Animal Care and Control brings in $3.2 million for Marion County alone. So our animals are bringing in more than our endangered adult population, which is kind of scary.
Excuse me, what do you mean when you say bringing in?
As far as caseload, for an example, Child Protective Services at any given time, they're only supposed to have 17 investigations. Adult Protective Services at any time, an investigator has 30-plus cases. So again, with our population growing in the funding or their lack of, there's a big significant jump in there.
Thank you.
So you're going to hear me say endangered adult a lot. That's going to be an individual by state definition that is 18 years of age and older, unable to provide self-adequate care. A lot of times that's going to be due to dementia, Alzheimer's, physically disabled, mental illness. In addition to that, they're unable to provide self-adequate care. Note on here that age alone does not make you an endangered adult. I know the name is pretty misleading in that Adult Protective Services, and that people will call us and say, hey, I'm an elderly person, or I'm an adult and I'm in need of services. I need a protective order filed. Age alone does not make you under the umbrella of services. Okay. As far as APS investigators, as mentioned, we have 6 full-time investigators and 1 part-time outreach coordinator. We have 2 investigators that are retired law enforcement officers, and then I have, as mentioned, have a degree in gerontology, and then 2 of our investigators have a social work background, and then we have somebody that has a master's degree in substance abuse and addictions. So it's our responsibility, once a case comes in, to investigate those cases of allegations of abuse, neglect, exploitation, and self-neglect. We are sworn in law enforcement officers, however, we have limited law enforcement power. For an example, we cannot go out and do an outright arrest, but there are things under that we can do, which I'll get into a little bit later. On average, each investigator opens at about 11 cases per week, so the volume is pretty high. There's 18 different units within the state of Indiana, totaling only 44 investigators. We do, as mentioned, we prosecute our own criminal cases, and again, as we screen those through our prosecutor, Cindy. It's not always going to rise to a level of prosecution, though. A lot of our cases, majority of our cases are self-neglect cases. So even if it comes in through Adult Protective Services and we don't necessarily have a criminal component, we will coordinate with other services to try to get help for our victims. We work very closely with the health department. We work very closely with our area agency on aging, which is SACOA, Central Indiana Council on Aging. And if it comes into our office and if they're not an endangered adult, we're not going to say, hey, we can't help you, sorry about your luck. We're going to get you the resources and avenues to get the assistance needed. So basically there's 2 components to Adult Protective Services. It's protecting the endangered adults to substantiate the criminal component, and then there's getting the need for immediate assistance to our victims when they are in need of services. This kind of gives you a quick look at Adult Protective Services. There are 18 units total within the state of Indiana. I am with Unit 8, and I serve Boone, Hendricks, Hamilton, and Marion counties. And we are at the mercy of our prosecutors, our elected officials. There's quite honestly not a lot of uniformity within the state of Indiana and our contracts. So it depends on which prosecutor wants us to do different things. We abide by that. For an example, in Marion County, as mentioned, we do our own criminal cases. In Boone County, their crime rate isn't as high as Marion County, so they want their own local law enforcement to do their own criminal cases. So again, it just kind of depends on which county. I have 4 different counties and 4 different ways of doing things. We currently have a new state director, Michael Patterson. He's been in a couple months now, I think 4 months, and he's working on, again, with the directors, trying to get more of the uniformity going on with what we're going to be doing here in the future. So by state statute for Indiana Code, protective services is going to be medical, psychiatric, residential, and social services. Some of the things that we can do under Adult Protective Services with the assistance of our prosecutor, Cindy, is we can file protective orders. We can do commitment orders. On our staff, we do not have a medical professional, so we rely heavily on what doctors say and what medical records are going to be telling us. So we can do things with working with our local doctors if our victims are going to a doctor. We can do a commitment order with their assistance. And a lot of times that's going to be your mentally ill population, We're just trying to get them the medications that they need in order to get them stabilized so they can go back out into the community or whatever environment in which they came from. Another thing that we can do is file for a guardianship as a last resort. Oftentimes our victims don't have anybody caring for them. They have no family, they have no resources, no networks out there, and they are in immediate danger to themselves. They can't reside in their home, which they have been doing for whatever various reasons. As a last resort, we can petition probate court for an emergency guardianship. That is good for 60 days, and then we have to have a permanent hearing for that. Now we have a program called CARE, which is your Center for At-Risk Elders, and we are working alongside with them to petition for guardianships. They actually have some funding through the Indiana Supreme Court that is specifically designated to adult protective services cases. So that has been very beneficial. Some of the local hospitals are also on board. So if we have a victim that comes in through the ER or the hospital, whatever the situation, they can do their own petition. And that's nice in that that's not taking away Adult Protective Services money to petition when we need it on a home-based person. As far as reporting, and this is just for Indiana alone, under-reporting is very prevalent. For one case that is not reported, 25 go unnoticed or unreported. A lot of times that's going to be to barriers to reporting. Oftentimes our victim is isolated. The perpetrator will leave during the day. They will take a phone away from them. Sometimes our victims are bedbound. Their mentality, sometimes it's not uncommon to have a 2-year-old, 3-year mentality, and they don't know what resources or what avenues are out there to assist them. And oftentimes with our elderly population especially, they grew up in an era that you didn't disclose your dirty laundry, so to speak. They're embarrassed, they're ashamed, it's been embedded in their head that this is an isolated incident, it's not going to happen again, and oftentimes that they've been made to believe that what's happening to them is their fault. The perpetrator makes them feel that way. So those are a couple of the reasons why we're not receiving full reports all the time. You do have in Indiana a duty to report, it is the law. If you have even a slight suspicion that somebody is falling under the guidelines of Adult Protective Services and they are being abused or neglected, you have a duty to make that report. Failure to report, it used to be a Class C infraction and now it's a B misdemeanor. So failure to report, you could, maybe not go to jail for not reporting, but if you have suspicion of something and you have failed to report it, as a result something happens to that endangered adult, you could be held liable for that. False informing as well. You get a lot of these reports. We get people that are, I'll show you, where they're going to retaliate against a loved one. You get like child custody battles, and they say, I'm going to report Adult Protective Services to you, just for nothing else, out of spite. So unfortunately we get those as well. You can make an anonymous report to Adult Protective Services. You don't have to disclose your information. We ask that you do that though for the benefit of the investigators. Human error happens when people call into the 1-800 number or to the intake line. Sometimes we get the wrong address, sometimes we get the numbers reversed. So if nothing else, the investigator can call you back and say, hey, I can't find this address, and maybe it was just a glitch in the system, however it came in. So confidential, you don't have to disclose your information, and all, again, reports are anonymous. Oftentimes people demand to know who made the report to Adult Protective Services, and we never disclose that. Usually we'll say that it came in anonymous on our tip line. So. Where to report, we have a 1-800 number as mentioned. I have a toll-free 1-877 number since we do cover 4 counties. In the outlining county, sometimes it's long distance to call Marion County where our hub is located, so we do have that. We have a fax number. You can call in. We have a generic APS email because my last name is kind of hard to spell, let alone pronounce. So also, we have an emergency on-call pager. We always have an investigator on call. And that's not for the general public. That's usually going to come in through dispatch, through our law enforcement line. Information needed. Adult Protective Services, we are unarmed. We are in street clothes. We go out unannounced. So oftentimes we don't know what we're walking into. as complainants, if you guys know that it is a dangerous environment, if you know that there's drug activity, if there's a lot of foot traffic, any and all information, we as investigators really appreciate the information that you can give us. The who, what, when, where, why of a case. If it's a victim only, if it's a self-neglect case, we need to obviously have a name. You'd be surprised at people that call and say, oh, it's the White House on the corner of Washington Street, and there's no address. That's kind of hard for us to locate. If there's a perpetrator involved, the information of the perpetrator, and then a brief narrative. What is your concern? Why is it that you are calling us, and what would you like in return? As far as follow-up, we could do a better job having only 6 investigators with the high volume of cases that we are investigating. We don't always call back and let you know that the case has been closed. And again, due to confidentiality, we're limited as to what we can tell you. But we can at least give you the courtesy of saying, hey, this case is closed, it was substantiated, unsubstantiated. We get a lot of subpoena requests for our records. Some people are suing whomever, the caregiver, the facility, and they want our records. And that'll result in us doing a motion to quash, and we'll do that through our prosecutor. As far as what happens when a report is made, as mentioned, we go unannounced. Reason being, we don't want to tip off our perpetrator, especially if it's a neglect or an abuse situation. If they're lying in their own feces and urine and they're bedbound, we don't want to say, hey, I'm ATS, I'm going to be out at your house at 3 o'clock. So for obvious reasons, we don't want them to know that. I go through and I triage the cases, so we're going to get to the ones that are more severe in nature. Again, a decubitus ulcer we're going to get out to before we're going to get out to a bed bug or a hoarding situation. Those tend to be cases that have happened over a period of time and not immediate. So, another thing I wanted to mention really quick, a lot of people kind of turn their back because if there's a power of attorney in place, or if there is a guardian in place, a court order, appointed guardian, people think, oh, well, they have the right to do what they want. And people still misuse their rights or their power to do things. So just because that petition is in order, we can revoke those if we have substantiated that they're not looking after the best interests of their ward. So don't let that be a deterrent. Picture's worth 1,000 words, as they say. This is just an example of one of the cases. This was a Hamilton County case. The person that made the report was the home-delivered meals driver, and he was noticing that the meals were piling up outside, and the victim in this situation would just kind of open the crack of the door and just kind of stick her head out. So he became pretty alarmed over time as outside of the condition of the home, the debris, the yard wasn't being maintained. The mail was piling up. So we went out. She wouldn't let us in, so we had to get a court order to do so. We went in, and her house she would just dispose of her depends wherever she was. Very sad situation. Her husband had passed away 18 months prior to us going in. It took that long for somebody to report, surprisingly. But his area of the home was totally clean. She had upkept that part. So we got her to the hospital. Had to shave her head because she literally had a nest in her hair. But she's doing remarkably well now. We got a court-appointed guardian, and she's now in a facility, and she's doing great. So this is just one example. And people that call in reports, it can be a neighbor, it can be a school bus driver, mail delivery. We get reports in all forms. So this is just another case that we went out to. What you're looking at are mouse droppings, mouse feces. And here you can actually see the mice. This is the top. What you were looking at before was the bottom of the bed and the box frame, and then this is the top of the mattress. So, and then here you can actually see the mice. So.
Big fat.
Yeah.
Mice won't even leave in your
Right, yeah, they usually scurry on, so. Some misconceptions with Adult Protective Services, again, is competency versus age. If we have an individual, yes?
When you were talking about you going in there and investigating the situation, if that woman is in a facility, what happens to her home? Is that sold to take care of her in the facility?
Yes. What we can do is we can petition for a state-appointed guardian over the person and or state. Now, normally with Adult Protective Services, we're working with the indigent. So a lot of times there's no assets, there's no property, real property, cars, a lot of times they don't have anything. So in this situation, this house actually ended up being bulldozed. So it was that bad. That in situations we can do an estate guardianship.
Thank you.
Great question. So competency versus age. If we have an individual that is making poor decisions, it's their decision to make if they are considered competent, if they are alert and oriented. So again, it's frustrating, and I'll get into that a little bit later, but self-neglect is not a crime, but it's a condition in which that person chooses to live in. And again, there might be underlying factors as to why that person is living in that condition, and we will investigate to see what those contributing factors are. But usually unsanitary living conditions, if that's the only cause for concern that you guys as a complainant have, that's usually going to be dealt by the health department. They're the ones that do the code enforcement and can do a vacate order. That's not something that Adult Protective Services can do. So those are times that we do work very closely though. Not a placement agency. Oftentimes people call us and say, hey, my loved one is in need of a nursing home placement or assisted living. Not Adult Protective Services, not what we do. Not bill collectors. Oftentimes the facility will call us, a nursing home, assisted living, because they're not getting their payment. Again, there might be contributing factors as to why that is. We might have an exploitation case. So we'll go and we'll investigate as to why that is and why they're not getting paid. But as a general rule, we are not there to collect because they're not getting their funds. We're unable to force entry. We don't have probable cause to do that. We work very closely with our local law enforcement. Again, that we're not armed and we're not in uniform, and sometimes that alone can be an intimidating factor to our victims. So if we don't have probable cause to contact a local law enforcement to let us in and work with that, then that's not something we can do. Frustrations, how are we doing on time?
Oh, you're fine.
Okay.
Taking pictures.
Frustrations. Lack of placement, and this is another situation that we worked with the health department. There was a very small path through this house. This obviously is a fire hazard. This was just as bad on the stove in the kitchen. So this person was deemed competent though, and this was their norm. I'm sure you guys have seen the show Hoarders. I think that's on A&E. So we're getting a lot of those cases that come in. But lack of placement is frustrating in that if I have a victim that I need to get out of a dangerous situation, I have no place to put them. If I don't have enough to do a guardianship and I need to pull that person, say, for example, on emergency calls, oftentimes on the weekends or after hours, law enforcement will call us and say, hey, I'm going to arrest the caregiver, leaving this victim without any help. They can't stay here by themselves. We're at a loss in Marion County, actually all the counties that I serve. Oftentimes we're dealing with a group of individuals that are incontinent. Oftentimes they are on oxygen, they're in wheelchairs, they're physically disabled, they have the mentality of a child, and our shelters won't take them. They have to earn their keep, so to speak, and if you have people that can't get up and self-serve themselves with adult daily living things, then they can't be in a shelter, unfortunately. Competency, I've had cases of abuse, especially you go out and the handprint is fresh, still on their cheek, and it doesn't coincide with, oh, I tripped and I fell down the stairs. So unless if we have a witness that saw the abuse take place, or unless if we have a victim that is going to cooperate with us, it's hard to prosecute these cases. Oftentimes our victims would rather put up with the abuse. They're afraid of being institutionalized. Oftentimes it's their child that is the abuser, and they would rather defend their child because they don't want to see them go to jail. Oftentimes, again, it's been embedded in their head that it's their fault or it's an isolated incident. So that's frustrating. Yes?
The fear of being institutionalized, isn't that a false fear because you don't have an institution, you don't have any place to put them?
Well,
or do you?
Oftentimes, a loved one, the perpetrators say, I'm going to throw you into a nursing home. You're going to lose your sense of independence. here you're in your house that you've worked your whole life, you've retired, you've got your Social Security, you're enjoying your golden years, and now you're going to be in a 24-hour facility. So a lot of time, I mean, and there's good facilities out there, don't get me wrong, but they're afraid because the perpetrator has made them feel that it's a bad situation.
Do you keep statistics on these issues?
As far as
Like,
allegations investigated, or?
no, your frustrations, is the list shared with any authoritative agency to say these are our problems?
We are currently working with FSSA, the Division of Aging, yes, and the director, and also we have a new secretary that he's got a degree in geriatric psychology, so he is familiar with what needs are out there and what hurdles that we face.
Does this go to the governor's level or to Washington DC?
Through FSSA, our Division of Aging, yes. Yes. So, yes.
I was just curious, in this situation you described where they're wanting to make the arrest, excuse me, and you say you don't have any place to put that person. So what happens? Do they make the arrest, or?
They do. And sometimes we can work with some of the hospitals that will place that person just until again, it usually happens on a Friday or on a weekend, and we can't get into a court to get a court order to do like a protective order. So usually, sometimes the hospitals will keep them. It depends if, if they're at capacity as far as beds and they have nothing available. So hopefully we can find a relative or a neighbor to at least come and watch them until we can find something a little bit more concrete to get them assistance. Immediate detentions, as I mentioned earlier, we cannot do an outright arrest, but as law enforcement sworn officers, if I go out to a situation and if there's somebody in immediate danger to themselves or others, say, for an example, I have a mentally ill person and they're hallucinating and they are going to inflict self-harm or harm somebody else, we can place them under immediate detention. That entails taking them, detaining them, and it is kind of like an arrest because they are losing their right to stay where they're at. We take them to a hospital where they are to be surveyed, assessed, and they're supposed to stay for a period of time. Especially with our mentally ill population, if they're having a psychotic episode and they're in that episode, by the time we wait for transportation, because Adult Protective Services we don't transport, where we wait for law enforcement to transport that individual to the hospital. By the time they get to the hospital, that episode is over. So the doctors are looking at us like, why are they here? There's no reason for them to be here. And we kind of have a joke within our unit that, oh, they're going to be home before we're home. And then it's a pattern. They have that episode again. Oftentimes these individuals that are in group home environments, and they have combative behaviors because they're not medicating whatever the problem is as far as mental illness. Oftentimes it's not uncommon to have a 4-car assist. So that's 4 police officers there just to calm and stabilize that victim. And then it's, of course, taking them off the streets for what other emergencies are there. So prosecution, again, oftentimes our victims are not considered reliable witnesses. We have victims that can't remember what they had for breakfast, let alone by the time it gets through the court system. That can take up to months. But we have to use that to our advantage, too, to show the court, or if it gets to a jury, hey, this is why this person is preyed upon. This is why they make such a great victim to be victimized. And then we have to do an evidence-based prosecution. And it's kind of like if you have somebody that has been murdered. You don't have your victim there. So fortunately, we have a great prosecutor that works with us and can look outside the box too. And if they don't fall under services of an endangered adult and we can't get them on that, then we can try to get them under something else. So, and as far as the guardianships too, this has changed in that it used to be that once a guardianship was petitioned through Marion County. Oh, I'm sorry.
I've got one question.
Sure.
One of them is medical issues. Where do they go? I mean, all of these things are also medical issues.
Mm-hmm.
And who deals with that? I know you're saying the prosecutor, your person, but at a level where they can make changes to decrease the frustration. The other thing I heard you say was in my 4 counties, there is no, how prevalent is that around the United States? Is that typical?
Well, Indiana is so unique in that we're housed out of the prosecutor's office, and that is the only state that is set up that way. So I think what the hurdles that we are experiencing are different than what other states come across. And our state statutes are very different too, in that ours is pretty vague and sometimes, can hurt us in the long run. Like California, for instance, their state statute for endangered adults is they're just 65 and older. So anybody automatically that's 65, you do their cases. So a lot of times it's us trying to substantiate that person is even an endangered adult. And if we have victims that, for whatever reason, they're not seeking medical treatment, they're paranoid, they're afraid, they just don't want to go to a doctor, it's hard for us to substantiate, especially a financial exploitation case. We have to prove that at the time that those withdrawals were happening, that victim was an endangered adult. So without that medical diagnosis, it's hard for us to prove that, that person didn't know what was happening at that time. So that can another frustration.
Before we take the break, I want to, your question was about, if I understand, about the ethical part. Are you sort of discussing like how we are making a decision as to whether or not we file a guardianship on someone? Is that kind of what you're asking, or what?
Well, I was thinking more to get some of this addressed on a wider level, maybe.
Yeah. Well, I think was it the Elder Justice Act just was not funded again?
Right.
Right. So there is a federal statute called the Elder Justice Act, and it was just not funded, so thank you. So that's a problem, right? And then you heard Andrea talk about the difference. CPS also falls under FSSA. What was their budget?
Like 600 million.
Their budget is 600 million, and APS's budget is 2.9. So there's a big difference. So what's going to happen, I think 2 things have happened recently. We got the new director of FSSA, who is a geriatric psychiatrist, so I think that's going to be helpful because he has a focus with the elderly. Plus, good or bad, the number of elderly folks are going to be jumping significantly here. By 2030, we're going to peak. And also, I believe that they are starting to look at our statutes a little differently, and if we can get them to the legislators to make it 60 and above, and also an endangered adult. So we are working on some things. We just had a conference with the Indiana Prosecuting Attorneys Council last month, and one of the directors at that agency that lobbies on behalf of prosecutors is very excited. She actually used to work in our office as well, and she has latched onto this issue. And so we're kind of hoping that that's going to be the next big thing that the legislature addresses, because it is a problem that is going to happen because, as you know, we're getting older. And so I think they're going to have to address it and make it 2 different sections, so that we have the endangered adult section and we have just adult, just quote unquote senior crimes. Because we do have some crimes that go just to age, but most of them considered an endangered adult. And as Andrea said, I'm supposed to prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt that you're an endangered adult, and then I want you to believe what they say on the stand. Kind of hard to get those things to work. So we do have some problems, and that's why it's a lot harder to prosecute these crimes. So does that answer your ethical question? Yeah. And Congress is not helping us out a whole lot either.
So do you guys have like a lobbying organization?
Yeah, IPAC is the prosecutors' lobbying organization, and so hopefully with Suzanne O'Malley working on this issue, and then our new director and the new director of FSSA, if nothing else, if we could just get a little more money for APS, even if they don't change the law, 2.9 million, okay, when she said 41 investigators, she's talking about 41 investigators for the entire state of Indiana. 1,592 CPS. Quite a disparity there. There are just as many endangered adults as there are children. And I'm not saying children shouldn't be taken care of, for heaven's sakes, but there's just as many endangered adults, and we're obviously have not been given the funds to take care of that. And then when we shut down all of the institutions, Central State, I'm not saying there was great places, but we shut down all those institutions, and we said to the mentally ill people, here are your medicine, bye, have a nice day. And so we are stuck in that situation where we put them back in and we try to get them into a place, but there just are not very many facilities. Andrea talked about care. with the Center for At-Risk Elders, they are now also working with, what's it called, Mental Health America in Midtown. So they've got a contract with Mental Health America in Midtown, and so they're trying to also bring the mentally ill into that as well, because this is a very large group of people and those people kind of need to stay in the community, because you don't want to put them all in a facility, but they need to have guardians in the community, and that's harder. So there's a whole lot of stuff that's going on, and we're hoping to get some of that changed here in the near future. And if you want to call your legislature, that would be fantastic. So we could really use some help on that. I had no idea when I started in this position a year ago, all of this stuff, and it's been fascinating and also disheartening at the same time. And these investigators, they spend a lot of time trying to work really hard, and we spend a lot of time discussing, okay, we're limited here, but what can we do here? We're limited here, what can we do here? And trying to do everything that we can while not putting someone in a guardianship and taking them out of their home if they don't want to do that. Because that's not what we want to do. My parents are getting older. I don't want to take them out of their home either. So you want to try to keep them in their house until they can't do it. But at some point in time, we have to step in if there is no one else and do it. So we spend a lot of time discussing ethics that way as well. So we don't want to step in and just become the state and take over someone, because I believe that's completely inappropriate. Good? Okay, is it break time now? Okay, break time. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you a little about some of the crimes that we can charge as related to endangered adults. So what we have to then prove, as Andrea just gave you the definition for an endangered adult, if we're going to file that crime, we have several different levels that we can file. And they just recently changed the law in July. We used to have A through D felonies in Marion County, and now we have level 1 through 6 felonies. And so they changed the sentencing structure and they changed the levels of felony. But basically what we can file is a level 6 felony if it results in bodily injury, a level 4 felony if it results in serious bodily injury. So a serious bodily injury would be something like a broken bone, unconsciousness, or extreme pain. And then a level 2 felony if it results in the death of that endangered adult. Neglect of a dependent, also a crime that we can charge. So that is something, if you are in charge of an endangered adult and you neglect them in some way, in other words, you don't provide them with food or shelter or health care, the same thing, you place that in dependent and endangers their life or health, abandon or cruelly confine the dependent, or deprive them of necessary support. So it's one of those three things. Abandon or cruelly confine the dependent, that is something like leaving a person in a car. In a hot day, I just recently filed a case under that statute. There was a person who left an endangered adult, a young man who was unable to move. He was blind and deaf, and the woman left him in a car, much like you leave a baby in a car, and went inside a building and just left the child in the car. Actually, it was not a child; he was 32 years old. And then to deprive them of necessary support. Support is food, shelter, and clothing, and medical care. So we can file that. The same levels of felony apply. We can file a level 6 felony if it just causes bodily injury, level 4 felony if it's serious bodily injury, and then level 2 felony if it results in death. And we have filed those charges. Did y'all see in the paper yesterday about the case involving Linda Kelly and DCS? Did anyone see that in the paper? I think it was yesterday morning's paper. DCS is allowed to keep children once they get past a certain age, and in that case, they stayed in charge of Linda Kelly, even though Linda Kelly was an adult at that time when she passed away, and we were notified after they found her passed away. So that was unfortunate that we were not notified of that, because maybe we could have gone in and done something different. Does everyone know what that is? It was a 18-year-old, was she 18 or 19?
18.
18-year-old young lady who had spina bifida, and she was living in her parents' house, and CPS had been in that house many times over the last 7 or 8 years, and had found neglect of a dependent before, and then that child, she was never removed, and then she turned 18, DCS stayed in charge of her, Daymar was there working, and then she literally died of sepsis because she was injured very badly. And I've seen the pictures, they are terrible. We would have put some in the program tonight, but Andy said we should not. We have some that are like that, but literally the woman has bed sores to the point where you can see the bones in her back and those sorts of things. And so those are the kinds of the problems that we come up with, and that's why it's important for you guys to look out for your friends. Because when your friends start not coming out of the house, or those things are going on, that's what could be going on with your neighbors, and when you start seeing those sorts of things. So that's why it's important to report those things. Yes, sir?
How can someone have faith in the system if something as obvious as that
I know.
go on?
Good question. I don't know the answer to that question. I mean, I read the articles where she said that, and Andrea told you they're overworked, and they are overworked. I've worked with CPS when I was a sex crimes prosecutor, child abuse, And the turnover there is very high because the pay is very low and the stress is very great. And that's really sad because, you know, people who don't take care of people make a lot more, you know, people who work in high-paying places and managerial places make a lot more money than people who are working in home health care. We have a lot of those issues because home health care people are wonderful, most of them. And then you get the occasional one that is bad. The problem is you have to figure out which one that is. So I don't know. I don't know. But why didn't her parents say something either, right? I mean, they had, and I can tell you, there's no way they didn't know this. I've seen that there's no way the parents did not know about this. There's absolutely no way. So I don't know. If you have the answer to that question, my suspicion is you will be president, right? Yes, ma'am.
I just wondered how things could go on for so many years with so many reports of
CPS.
whoever went and looked,
Chris?
and yet nothing was done, basically.
Well, I should just be quiet. It's probably best if I just be quiet. And they have confidentiality. I will say the word, they use the word, I think they use their confidentiality a lot. And that's all I can tell you.
But not to mention too, you had a home health care agency in the home providing services too.
Why didn't they report? I think there's going to be several people that get in trouble for that. I just don't know exactly how that's going to play. But that's part of the issue. Oh, look what we've opened up a can of worms. Yes, ma'am. But that's the problem. I mean, this is the issue.
I know of a lot of home health care and supported living mental health. I work in that, and they don't report well. They do not report well. That was one of my problems.
And do you think that is because the people who go into the home don't want to report, or do you think it's because the people who are higher in the agency don't want them to report? I agree with you on that one. I think that's true. And I don't know, and that's wrong, though, because they are supposed to do that. Yes, sir.
Yeah, recognizing that there's the duty to report and laws like that, that for some people that would make them actually turn away more because they wouldn't want to get involved. But are there things that a neighborhood can do to, what are those things that they should look for or recognize that may be an indication of a problem?
We actually have some, we can sort of skip to that. There are some red flags that we talk about. If you start seeing multiple calls to 911 coming along, right, those sorts of things happening, or those kinds of things happening, if you start seeing newspapers piling up, the lawn not being mowed, or just changes in that person in general, if they're coming out wearing the wrong clothing based on a certain time of year, like, and think of it like domestic violence. If there's a perpetrator in a home, it's sort of like domestic violence. If the person who is a victim of domestic violence is then, they're into their home, they don't come out, they're wearing long sleeves in the summertime to hide bruises, they're making explanation for things. Those are some of the things that can go on. Banks send us a lot of information if indeed they see that someone's flow of money is changing, like if someone's coming in and taking money out of the account, or the money, you know, it's going up and down more than it did before. I would say that as a neighborhood, it would be sort of like having a good crime watch, adding it sort of to your crime watch area to pay attention to the folks who live in your neighborhood and know your neighbors. I think we've gotten away from that as a society, not knowing who lives in our neighborhood, or at least the couple of people right around you. Everybody's so busy that we don't know what's going on. So I think that's one of the things that has happened. So again, another societal issue that we probably need to address, you know, by making sure that we're just looking out for other people. Yes, ma'am.
And that's what I was thinking about, Mr. Mayor. What can our neighborhood association do to help? We've got to get our senior committees together and whatever, and maybe when you get a report or something to take to us, the neighborhood association, maybe we can kind of patrol it, or kind of look out as a neighbor. Well, first I've got to, in my neighborhood association, I've got to get that group of the seniors in our QOLs, maybe we'll talk about that. And when y'all get a report or something, but you can't work on it, maybe you go to us and say that y'all people.
Wasn't there used to be a book of neighborhood associations at the mayor's office?
Yes, we are.
Secretary of State. Through Metropolitan Development. I don't even know if it's called Metropolitan Development anymore. But you can still, and I always say when I say, you can Google it, because not everybody Googles it.
Right.
But it's a book that you can get. It's only $5 from the city. But also the QOL, quality of life. I know, Cindy, you had gone to that meeting.
I did.
At TAB. one of the things is just recognizing that there are organizations that are specifically beginning to think about the elderly in their community, because I know that the Quality of Life group is looking at how to survey, how to identify what some of the needs are in the community. So I think as part of a neighborhood association group, that I know that we look at juvenile issues, but that needs to be added.
Right,
The senior
exactly.
piece needs to be added to the neighborhood group, if that makes sense.
It makes sense.
We also have within our office, the Marion County Prosecutor's Office, we have 2 preventative groups, not to jump ahead, but we have our, as I mentioned, we have a part-time outreach coordinator that is in charge of our Senior Sentinel group. And that is, we currently have 7 volunteers that are seniors themselves that go out and educate other groups or other seniors specifically how not to become victims of crime. It's a free of charge presentation. It's usually about 30 minutes in length. And they will come out and talk to you as to whatever topic that you're interested in. With the winter months or Christmas or whatever holiday you celebrate coming up, it can tell you how to be a safe shopper, or identity theft is very popular right now. And then with that, we also have, which you can talk about since it's your program.
Then I also, and I know a couple of you have attended already, I do a program, it's called CASE, Communities Against Senior Exploitation. It's also free. I go a little more in depth than the Senior Sentinels. They talk about any topic you want, but I do a presentation that talks about frauds and scams and different things, and we partner with the Attorney General's office, and we go around talking to neighborhood associations, senior centers. We just set up, we're going to American Senior Communities. We're going to all of their assisted living centers within the next 3 months, and so we're trying to get in all the senior centers. And any church group, I've been to several churches, spent a Saturday having a brunch and lunch with the seniors and teaching them about that sort of stuff. So we also will do that for free after hours as well. These things don't have to go on during the work hours. And all that information Annie has in the back. Yes, Ms. Kern?
And I don't want to suggest that we always have to create something new when I mention the neighborhood organizations. Check with the local indie parks in your area. For instance, like the Martin Luther King Center, I know they have senior groups that meet there. So maybe if the neighborhood association, first identify what exists already for the seniors. And then also the multi-service centers. I know Forest Manor Multi-Service Center, several of them, they already have senior groups. Find out how we can expand, and I think for the neighborhood group, when they do the assessments or those that are doing assessments, maybe kind of steer them toward those meetings and get them in there, because much of it's just social. Some of it's social and getting them connected and making sure they're not isolated. So identify what exists.
Where's that? Where's the place, that one we went to by North District?
I'll lose track.
I know. All right. Well, anyway, we went to them right after they did their morning exercise, right? They had their Zumba program, and then they came in and had a snack and did the presentation. So we're happy to come into any senior group.
Washington Park, right?
Yeah, Washington Park. That's it, right? Zumba and
And they got 100 seniors in there a
Right.
couple times a week. But yeah.
But my issue is, that's way out in our communities, in the near north area, whatever, we don't have that access. Oasis magazine, I get that, and it's doing 40s or whatever. We need something more in the community.
I would look at Tab, and if where is Mr. Boyd? Is Our Savior Lutheran Church in that near the Crown Hill? I'm losing track of where I am.
We're in the Highlands
Is there any senior groups that meet there?
That's near.
No, there isn't at the
Okay,
moment.
so yeah, so maybe yours needs to have something creative.
that's it. Yes, sir.
Honor Center is on the east side.
Bonner Center.
Bonner Center has.
The Bonner Center, is that close to you? There you go.
That's east.
Oh, is that too far for?
Where is your multi-service center?
That's over there.
Not according to
There's
Google.
also one other thing
The
to keep in mind.
closest is Clarendon.
When we think about agencies that can help these people, none of that will really work if you're not a community in your block, if you're not looking out for this. As a member of a crime watch that had a paraplegic lady that fit every one of these descriptions on it, there were times when we had to respond because there was nobody to come for her. So my wife would come across the street at midnight. The next door neighbor lady down the street also knew her. She would cross that street at midnight for her. it's going back to the crime watch again. It's going back to that small little group right there on the block. You can have the John Bonner Center down 6 blocks away. You can have the fire department 6 blocks away. But you've got to have everybody on that block involved with that. Because that's how these people slip through the cracks.
That is correct.
You don't know your neighbors.
You don't know your neighbors. And so we need, the service thing, we need to go back down and get to know the people beside us as opposed to the people that are miles and miles away. Yeah, I agree. Okay, on that note, that's such a lovely thing we're talking about, isn't it? So the other thing that we can charge is non-support of a parent, child, or spouse. So if you are a person who's supposed to take care of your parent, child, or spouse, and you fail to do so, we can also charge you with that crime. None of my crimes that I can charge get a whole lot of jail time. This is the problem. If you notice, battery or neglect resulting in death is only a level 2 felony. To me, if you're neglecting someone to the point of, say, like Linda Kelly, to the point where she, is dying, that's to me nearly more like murder. So and we can charge that, but it's funny to me that we have it as a level 2 felony when someone died. It seems to me like it should be, and we will in some cases charge murder, just like in baby death cases. We can charge murder in some baby death cases, but sometimes we cannot. But it is kind of hard. In order to prove those cases, we have to prove the absence of everything else, and then that leads you to the murder of that individual. So that's how that works. So we can also child exploitation of an endangered adult. So this is the part where we're talking about people who steal the money or take the property of the elderly person or the endangered adult. A lot of times this comes with taking their Social Security money because, that's their only source of income. And a lot of these people don't want to give up their person who lives with them because their only source of income is the SSI or the disability that person's getting. So that is a problem. So we deal with a lot of that, and those are sometimes hard to prove, as Andrea said, because you have to prove that the endangered adult didn't exactly know what was going on. But at the same time, I know that if my parents had dementia and they were able to say, hey, would it be okay if I spent the money to go to college? I doubt that my parents would say no. So how do you determine whether or not the parent would say that, as long as you are taking care of them? The problem is, what happens is they neglect them and take the money and then don't spend anything on the parent, the child, or the spouse because they're taking all the money for themselves. So that's where we get into the problem, to prove their own profit. All right, so financial crime. So how do they do it? This is more like the strangers. People will move in on the elderly man or the rich elderly man, and the young woman moves in and says, hey, I'm going to gain in and become their friend. They may tell a believable story, promise fast returns, and we'll talk about some charities. Those people will show up and ask you to donate money to charities. Be careful of the recent tragedies. If you're giving money to people, that's, there might be the next hurricane or the next tornado, so you want to watch out for those things. You want to make sure you're giving to legitimate charities. We talk a lot about that in my Power Against Fraud crime that I have some handouts that I will give related to that. And they start with legitimate activity and change to criminal activity. A good example of that, and it's unfortunate that this one happens to be about a home health care worker. We have a couple of those. So you have to be careful when you hire people to come into your home. So we had one person that was legitimate oxygen company, and they moved in and were delivering the oxygen, and the person who was actually delivering the oxygen convinced the woman that if she did not purchase for him toilet paper, paper towels, Tide, laundry soap, that he would stop delivering her oxygen. And so her daughter was able to figure this out because they were going to the store and she's buying all of these large amounts of these goods, and her daughter's like, why do you need all this? You live in your house by yourself. And the woman was, as Andrea said, ashamed, scared, and embarrassed, and so she did not tell her daughter what was going on. And when they finally figured it out, they learned that he was intimidating her into buying all of those things, and of course then he was found. Now that company was legitimate, but the guy that was working there was bad. And that's the things that you have to look out for. If you are watching someone who is older, you need to watch out for the people that are coming in their home. And also, you want to make sure that if you do have a home health care provider, and I tell you horror stories because these are the ones I hear, right? I don't hear about the 99 good ones. I only hear about the really, really bad ones. So don't everybody get scared. But a woman who moves in, becomes the caregiver, and then has her financial documents sent to her house instead of to the lady's house. The woman has dementia, and by the time the family found it and got back involved, $100,000 was gone on things like tattoos, race cars and things like that. So you have to be careful. You don't want your financial information being mailed to someone else. The problem is that lady had dementia, so she wouldn't necessarily have known anyway, right? That's the problem. So I can charge her with a crime, right? Theft, exploitation, D felony or level 6. What's the biggest problem? $100,000. I can get a restitution order for $100,000. How many of you think she's paying it back? Nobody. So that's the problem. So it isn't the fact that I can charge with a crime or that we can charge a crime. That's great. And if we try it. But the problem is all that money is gone. And now, if that was all the money she had, we have to figure out a way to get her on Medicaid. But Medicaid looks back 5 years. But we did recently find out that if there's a financial investigation, they'll let you do that. But what was a good living for her and a good place to be now may not be so great because that woman stole all her money, right? So you have to be on the lookout for the things that are going around with your friends and neighbors and with your relatives. Let's see, why do these people do these things? Profit, right? Everybody wants to make some money. That woman was paying her rent. She was doing all these things. Now, she was bringing the nice elderly lady her food, and she was taking good care of her and paying all of her bills, but she was using all the rest of it for herself. Some of them, they want to feel powerful. That happens a lot when it... and the need to feel important, that happens a lot in the domestic violence situation where the child becomes the perpetrator or becomes the abuser because, for whatever reason, the mom was not very nice or the father was not very nice, and so it switches over. We talk about that a little later on. And sometimes they're lonely, so they're moving in to do some different things. Who targets the elderly? Traveling groups. Home improvement, that's a big one. We talk a lot about that in the, you don't want anybody showing up at your door. This special bargain, I have all of this extra stuff to put in, to put down the new blacktop on your driveway, those sorts of things. Telemarketers, I tell everybody, and I'll tell you now, there's a whole topic on it, but don't answer your phone if you don't know who's calling. Charitable solicitations, reverse mortgage. Now, reverse mortgages actually exist, and they're really not a bad thing if you need it, but you need to be careful of what company you're working with. So those can be good, but you need to be careful about what you're doing. All right, Andrea talked a little bit about this when we talked about guardianships. These are some documents that you need to have in place before you get to a point where you need a guardian. Because what happens if you need a guardian and the state has to step in? Who's going to be your guardian? Nobody that knows you, right? And that's a problem because we prefer it to be someone that knows you. The Center for At-Risk Elders, they will take over and they will have a volunteer who becomes the guardian of the person, and they will become the guardian of the state. Someone asked what happens to their home. If they have a home, it's sold. But it's not sold for a high price, it's sold for whatever they can get. And then they manage that money, and then they use the estate to what they can do. But if you have a will or a trust is like a direction that is while you're alive. You can say how you want your money spent and what you want to do. I don't do trusts. But they are something so you need to go see a private attorney to do that. And a will is something that says what you want to happen to you after you're done. If you have a power of attorney, then you are telling the state, here's who I want to be in charge of me when I am no longer to be in charge of me, and you can designate the powers that person has. A healthcare directive, also very important, because that tells the hospitals or nursing facilities what you want or don't want done at the end of your life, right? So do you want nutrition? Do you want medication? When do you want that to stop? Those are important. They're hard discussions to have, but you need to have them because the people that are in your life need to know what it is you want done, and it's best really to have it written down. Because a doctor or a nursing facility can make up their mind if you don't have it written down. So those are important documents to have in place. You want to make sure that you have a list of important people in your life, your list of passwords. Think about this. If I were to, and it's bad, I don't have this, right? I sit here and tell you this. If I walked out of this building right now and I passed away, my mother would not know the password to my bank account. She would not know what my source of income is. She would not know where to find any of my things because I have it not written down. Isn't that terrible? I should have all that stuff, right? But we don't, and those are important things. If you are a person who has 3 or 4 different sources of income, you have your Social Security, you might have a retirement, you might have these different things. You need to write those down so that if you pass away, your children know where to find that information, and you need to put it in a place where it is safe, like in a lockbox, or you need to let them know where that is. And then another important thing is, and if you do get a guardian that is put in place by the state, they will prepay your funeral. And that way, that's one of the first things that money goes for, is that they prepay for a funeral with that. Also, if you do go on Medicaid, one of the things that you have to spend down Medicaid, and they will let you do, is get a funeral plan, right? Is that correct? Because you only allowed to have so much money if you go on Medicaid, but the prepaid funeral is also important. I also think that's important on a personal note because my mother is not going to want to do this. She doesn't want to do this, but I think that would be a nice thing to do for someone. That way it's already taken care of when you die. We had an investigator in office whose father-in-law passed away and he had done that, and all they had to do was sort of go there and take care of it. And that makes it easier for the person who is left behind, because then they don't have to make all those decisions. But that's just, you know, personal thought. Yes, ma'am.
Where do the state-appointed guardians come from?
Do you know the answer to that?
Well, the volunteers that are through the
CARE.
Center for At-Risk Elders, gosh, they have a lot of medical personnel, they have attorneys, they have pro bono attorneys that will do it. And then we have the Financial Care of Wabash Valley, that is another entity that will do guardianships, but however, they're based out of Vigo County in Terre Haute. And she has more than like 300 plus wards. So the good thing about CARE, Center for At-Risk Elders, is that it's a one-on-one ratio, which is excellent. So that's usually who we will petition on our behalf.
CARE is a relative, they've been around for only about, what, a year and a half? Is there a statute or is there something that requires volunteer or each county to have a thing like CARE now? Aren't they trying?
They're trying to work on that, yes. They've actually hired Erica Costello, who used to be an Adult Protective Services investigator in South Bend. There was more money allocated through the Indiana Supreme Court to allocate that money specifically for guardianships over endangered adults. So that's something that is in the works.
They're actually trying to improve that program. What they did is they have $19,000 per county if you can get $19,000 of matching money. So that means $38,000 per county for APS. It's really not a lot, but it's something, and that way that could go with the petitioning, because you have to pay the filing fee and those sorts of things to take care of that. The problem with using a company like Financial Care of Wabash Valley, and we prefer not to, because she has 300 people that she's taking care of. So it's more of a business thing than it is a kindly thing. And with the CARE, they have volunteers who stay with the ward until they pass away or until something happens, and then they have the business side that manages the estates that go along with that. So that's, go ahead.
People paid?
The volunteers? No, they are volunteers,
Okay.
and what they do is CARE sends them through, and you know what, they could really use some volunteers, so if you people are interested in that, I'm just saying, but they really are always looking for them. They are partnering with the hospitals and getting a lot of nurses, which is good. But what they do is they take them through an 8 to 10 hour training, talking to them about their responsibilities as a guardian, to make sure that 10 minutes, gotcha, so that all those things are taken care of. And then they go and visit them ever so often, and it seems like they become more friendly with them than a person like a company that comes in and just, looking at stuff and maybe not so great at it. So we use CARE because we really like them, and it's a good organization. And really, we're very fortunate because CARE's only in Marion County. So Hamilton, Hendricks, and Boone, they have nothing like this. So while Marion County is big, we do have something that we can work on, and hopefully they'll be getting some more of those in other counties. All right, so the only bad thing about this is most of the fraud and most of the people that endanger our adult or that take advantage of our adults are relatives, and that's the sad part, right? Because the parent gets older, and you have to be careful because there's no, they move in with the parent, they start spending the money, they're the ones neglecting them because they're living there, and that's that part about, so that's why we need to be careful about that. 90% of people who are abused by someone they know. And it makes sense if you think about it, because those people have access to the individual. So elements of abuse. So these are the things you get. So it's just like if you think about domestic violence, we talked about it a little bit before. It's similar to that. You get all the way from intimidation, mental abuse, physical abuse, and you're going to get a whole class on this next week. I believe the presentation is about domestic violence next week, so I won't steal all their thunder with that. But you need to look out for those things. The problem is some of these things are criminal and some are not. Intimidation is a very hard crime to prove. So what we look for in endangered adult cases, we try to prove things under undue influence and show that it started small and it worked its way up. As the person became more endangered, the crime went up, and so we try to get those together at a point then when we can file charges. So those are the controlling tactics, the intimidation. So I'm not going to do this for you. You deserve this. You didn't do something to me when I was a child. You didn't take care of me properly, so now you're going to get what you deserved, and those sorts of things. And these result in fear and psychological harm to the endangered adult. And if you think about it, that person is naturally weaker. I think we're coming up on that. This just That makes sense because there are more women that live longer than men, so there are more women who are abused, and 45% are self-neglect and 62 are substantiated. Caregiver stress, this is that what we talk about. So these people are taking care of their parents on a full-time basis or taking care of someone on a full-time basis. You become overwhelmed and you lash out at them. High stress and low resources, right? So if the only money that they're getting in what's about $721 a month. You get $721 a month for SSI. So think about you're trying to take care of someone and you can't work because you got to take care of them, and the only money you're getting is $721. So then you've got to figure out a way to deal with all of that stress for taking care of that person, because you have to bathe them, you have to change them, you have to get them to the doctor's appointment. They don't know how to even turn on a television anymore, and there's no money to take care of all those sorts of things. And so that results in the person, just having the blow up or treating the person badly. And then unfortunately the victim is seen as their problem. So now you're my problem and I have to deal with you, and I can't do the things that I wanted to do the rest of my life. So there's your domestic violence. So it can be physical, sexual, verbal, emotional, and economic abuse. And domestic violence in late in life is that thing where the perpetrator, the person who used to be the perpetrator of the abuse, the abusive mother or father, now becomes the victim of the abuse because they are weaker, right? They have, the person is no longer strong. My father used to be a really strong guy. Now he's not nearly as strong as he used to be. Got 5 minutes. Thanks, Kristen. And so that makes it easier for the abuser to take advantage of it. And who wants to put their son, who wants to call their police on their son or daughter? This is part of the problem. We have lots of those cases that come in over and over. Well, you know that the son or the daughter hit the parent or abused the parent or is even stealing the parent's money, but the parent is loath to get that person in trouble because they don't want to go into the extended care facility. Everyone's afraid of a nursing home, right? Everyone afraid of, right? You laugh, but right, no one wants to go there because you don't know what's going to happen. I can come and visit my mom every day and I can stay for an hour, but what happens the other 23 when she's not there to say something to me or say something about it? And as you become less able to talk for yourself or say things, we don't know what's going on. So you have to continually check on people in those places. All right, we'll leave that one for a minute. Let's talk about some popular scams. Sweepstakes. How many of you know the difference between a sweepstakes and a lottery? Some of you should, because you've been in my presentation.
Usually you don't pay to be in a sweepstakes.
That's right. You don't have to pay to be in a sweepstakes. It's free. But do you have to register to win the sweepstakes? Yes. And if you haven't registered to win the sweepstakes and you want it, and they want you to pay them $250 to get your money, you don't do that, right? That's right. Because
all their other items that they're sending you.
You say, what about the other items that you're sending you?
No, they send you the paperwork, and they're selling all of these items, and they say you don't need to buy it.
And you don't.
And you don't buy it.
And you don't.
And I don't think you ever get registered.
Yes, you do. Because by law, a sweepstakes is regulated by federal law. And what they do is they have a sweepstakes, and if it's a legitimate sweepstakes, the problem is if they're sending all those things, they're probably not a legitimate sweepstakes. But a legitimate sweepstakes is required by law it randomly, the computer generates numbers, and every once in a while it throws out a winner. And then it just mails out those things. If you mail back the winner, you will be the winner. Publishers Clearinghouse will show up at your door with balloons, a big giant check, and a television camera.
I'm waiting.
I know, you all are, right? But if they say to you when they send you that you win and they want $250 for you to collect your winnings, that is not legitimate. That's the problem. That's one of the things you don't want. You want to be on the lookout if they say, hey, you've won, we want you to send you some money. So you don't want to do that. We talked a minute about home improvement scams. All contracts for home improvement over $150 must be in writing. So if someone shows up at your door and says, I'll give you $200 to
Seal your driveway.
thank you, seal your driveway, that would be illegal for the two of you to enter that contract without it being in writing, okay? So you wouldn't want to do that. But here's the deal. If you're looking for your driveway to be sealed, what should you be doing? You should be contacting 3 companies and having them come out and give you an estimate. You shouldn't have the guy that drives up and down the street coming to seal your driveway because it's going to be black paint and it's going to wash off the next time it rains. You want to watch out for charities. The sound-alike charities, American Red Cross, Red Cross of America. There is a website called charitynavigator.org that you can check to see which amount of money is going to the charity and which amount of money is going to the person, and you want to obviously give more money to the amount of the charity that's going to the people. By law, The charity only has to give 15% of the money to a charity, to the people in need. Does anyone see a problem with that? 85% of the money that they can collect can go to overhead. So we prefer to give it to charities that are giving more than that to the people in need. So you want to look into that. The inheritance thing, oh, you inherited a lot of money and we don't want it to go to the Chinese government, so you need to send me $250 so that I can send you your $10 million check. No, right? We let the Chinese government have that money because we don't care. And the other one is the big one for overpayment. This will be coming up again now that we're going to run into tax time. You file your taxes and you think you owe them money, or you get a little bit of a refund. You'll get a call or an email or something that says, hey, this is the IRS, and you did your taxes wrong, and we would like to give you some more money back. Please give us your account number. No, right? We don't give anybody our bank account number. Identity theft. It occurs in multiples of ways. They can steal your identity. In the back, Annie brought these. The orange sheet of paper back there is a security freeze. I won't go into all about it, but it will, you can lock down your credit with it. You would like to get a copy of that on your way out. Someone's holding it up right there. Right there, the orange sheet of paper. So you get a security freeze that'll lock down your, what I have, 2 minutes, right? That will lock down your credit so that no one can open anything in your name. So if someone couldn't go to Dick's Sporting Goods and enter your social security number and get a Dick's credit card, it will lock down your credit, and then you just use a PIN number to open it if you want to get new credit. Managing personal safety. So these are important things. You want to make sure that, again, we could go on forever about this, right? If you're going to show up somewhere, you want to make sure that you're putting your purse in your trunk before you arrive at that location. You don't want to carry around extra items that you don't need to have with you, no extra credit cards. You want to photocopy things. You want to make sure that you have copies of all of your credit cards and all that important information somewhere off to the side. And there we go. We talk about perfect targets. We are unable to get help right away. Your victim depends on the abuser. People are weak and vulnerable, underreporting due to fear and embarrassment, and they're not aware of services available, and a refusal to prosecute. These are some of the problems that we have. I'm going to stop. We have probably one more slide, but that's good enough. Okay. Kristen wants to give out prizes. All right, any questions? Sign us up for any presentation that we have as well. Yes, ma'am.
What was that charity investigative?
CharityNavigator.org.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Okay. These want prizes.
All right.
Go. Prizes.
All right. Well, if you guys could join me in thanking our presenters tonight for a wonderful presentation. We'd also like to thank Prosecutor Curry, who is present as well, for attending this evening.